my career, I've been looking at the innovation side of what we do as an industry. About 3.5 years ago, the chairman of my organisation at the time, which was the National Microelectronics Institute, came to me and said, "John, I think we need to take a look at IoT security." And I confessed at the time, I thought, well, that sounds a little esoteric. It's a bit niche. Surely there are bigger things we should be talking about. Now, it took me about, less than a week, because when you start looking about the stories that are out there, and they still go on today, there are headlines everywhere. It's not about, are we sleepwalking into a situation? We're already there. And indeed, that was the forerunner to setting up the IoT Security Foundation, because we decided that something had to be done. No more horror stories. Let's start to address the problem. And that was really the start of why the IoT Security Foundation began.
Chris, do you think businesses are switched on enough to make use of this?
Absolutely not, unfortunately. In my last newsletter for the company, we had a blog written by someone who said, I've just done a year working in IoT and they don't put any security in at all. He wrote it under a pseudonym for obvious things, but I've come across this quite a lot. Security has to be designed in at the beginning, which is where the IoT Security Foundation documents come in very handy. But you can't add it on. And the trouble is, so many people are not designing it in and thinking about it at the start, and we have so many devices, phones, etc. We were discussing earlier that apparently it's a fact that you're only 6 handshakes away from the President of the United States.
It's a horrible thought.
Yes, well, it depends on your point of view, but the President, not a President, you know. And the comment was, you're probably actually only, any device you've got is probably only 4 connections away from a hacker on an open port. Now, that was a random number that was considered too high by a lot of the people I was talking to yesterday. And this is the problem. We already have phones with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. The average car has more connectivity than a house full of teenagers. And most of the hacks on cars have been through the connectivity. This is the problem. Alexa has been doing very strange things. It laughs at people randomly. I saw a story the other day where 2 people were having a discussion and a friend of theirs phoned them and said, please stop your discussion. Our Alexa is relaying your phone call to us. Your discussion in the house to us, the other end of the US. There are so many things connected and interconnected now, and you only need one weak link. And even if our friend here with his manufacturing plant is secure, I can check what he's doing with my things through the app on my phone. This isn't secure, possibly. So every link has to be secure, and the whole thing is only as secure as its weakest link.
Well, you had the example of a USB stick, didn't you?
Yes, I think in the past the shop floor was separated from the internet, and people claim to be secure in this guarded environment. However, we had examples many years ago, like the Slammer virus that came in via USB stick. So just a service engineer connecting a USB stick to a machine, and suddenly you have something in your production environment that you don't want to have there. Today we are opening up the shop floor to the internet. We want to build smart factories, and IoT devices are just small things anywhere. So it's not only securing big machines, it's also securing a Raspberry Pi with a temperature or humidity sensor, which is located at the shop floor. It is part of the network, and it has just an open source software with leaks and a very powerful CPU. And we have all kind of different devices, including mobile devices, watches, whatever, to make, let's say, life work for operators more easy. But all these devices have a much broader attack surface than in the past. And I think it's just starting now that people think about it. But the problem I see is conflict between IT and shop floor. Usually manufacturing try to keep IT out of the shop floor because these IT guys would always come with let's say inconvenient requirements, making life difficult because they were talking about security, passwords and so on. And this border is no longer there, so there's no longer a firewall around production, around manufacturing, and so this IoT security definitely needs to be addressed.
So John, how does a business, where do they start to think, and should they be starting to think right from the top down?
Yeah, I guess, just to chunk up a level, we were speaking earlier, and I know you found it really hard to believe that I've been in the industry for more than 30 years, given my appearance, but I have. I think, when I speak to people about what's going on in electronics, in electronic systems and communications technologies, we've seen it all before. We have seen it all before, but I believe we're at a moment of transition. And I believe this because most of my career we've been looking at innovation. I certainly have. First time in my career, when I started looking at security, I feel we need to slow down a little bit to get things right. Now, the things that have changed is this. We live in an age of digital transformation. That's the current vernacular. What that means, the underlying technology trends, which we've all been part of, is increasing connectivity and increasingly software-defined products. But let me cut it a different way. Let me look at it from the underbelly. What that means is hyper-vulnerability, hyper-hackability. That's what it means. And as Chris was saying earlier, we're only a couple of hops away. What that also means is that, do you care? Who should care? Well, the point is we all should care because we're all naked in the future in this world. So who's responsible? Again, part of the conversation we had, and maybe, sorry if I'm cutting into the questions, but when you think about it, we're all responsible, right? And if you can think about how the technology gets created, how it gets, purchased, installed, maintained and used, everybody's got a responsibility. So we start, if you like, on the left-hand side of that diagram. If you are a technology producer, then you've really got to be providing security controls right at that point. If you're acquiring the technology, for instance, for using in factories or in transport or health or entertainment or consumer, then you've really got to be asking for security features. So that should be part of your buying process from here on. And then finally, if you're a user, you need to make sure you maintain the hygiene. And that could be simple things like, making sure that you update your password and certainly do security patches. So we all own the problem. And I slave off the words of the great Bruce Schneier. He talks about, if we're not careful, we will be building a security debt. What he means by that is, let's just chase the profit motive, but at some point, we're going to have to go and rip those systems out or fix them, and it will cost more.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about some of the things you were saying, and what is a secure device? How about a Bluetooth connected thermometer for your fish tank? Someone got into that, got onto the computer for the main building. It was a casino in Las Vegas. They got the entire details of all the high rollers, names, addresses, credit count details, betting habits, where they stayed in the hotel and everything else, through the Bluetooth connection for the thermometer in the fish tank. It was recently in the press. I can give you the links to that later. But the other problem is, you mentioned IT. Embedded systems engineers usually work to critical system standards, but unconnected systems.
Yes, yeah.
IT guys are quite happy doing connected systems. But amongst a lot of embedded engineers, IT is seen are a bunch of cowboys because their standards are very low. A lot of the problem is we're going to have to bring programming up to the level of critical systems software engineering for everything. Because everything is connected, and everything is connected to a critical system. I was speaking to some guys about infotainment on vehicles, and they were using standard, basically it's an IT system on the front of a car. And I said, well, those are terrible ways you're developing it. And they said, if you want infotainment on cars, you have to work, that's how we do it. I said, that's the tail wagging the dog. Software programming has to come up to the level of software engineering for critical systems for almost everything now, because everything is connected to a critical system somewhere. Even your Bluetooth sensor, temperature sensor for a fish tank, connected to a secure system in the casino.
And
Can I just comment on that? You know, it's an interesting notion for people who are not so versed in security, as I wasn't 3.5 years ago. But I often talk about the epiphany of the obvious, and what I mean by that is 3.5 years ago, because I hadn't thought about these things, it was non-obvious. But when you think about them, that's just obvious, isn't it? So what does secure mean? Well, actually, secure is a relative term, and thinking of the audience that may be listening to this after we've recorded it, what I would appeal to them to think about security as, security, first and foremost, adopt a secure mindset. So think of it of quality. You have to embed security right away throughout your organisation and your operation, as we said earlier. The second thing is, don't just think of it of being aiming for perfect security. You will not get perfect security.
Right.
As the saying goes, perfect security is asymptotic. What you should be really thinking about is risk management. So you want to manage the risk to a point where it's acceptable, and that comes down to fitness of purpose.
And got an announcement. Probably pick that up. So do you there will be a level where, or a point where there has to be some kind of level that everything has to rise to? Because, like you say, something that probably only cost a couple of quid was the downfall of a casino's database, and that's a horrific scenario to be in, isn't it? You know, or a factory, you know, like you say, a USB stick going in somewhere and it delivers a virus. How can you get everyone into that mindset who are producing tiny things that are probably a minute margin?
Well, it's just, you have to design it in from the start. A lot of these problems have been known about for donkey's years. In fact, one of the speakers here yesterday, Ken Munro of Pen Test Partners, was demonstrating something a year ago which had security flaws in it which were quite common in the late 1970s.
Right. Yes.
And he put something up on screen and said, "What's that?" And all of us that had used modems in the 70s recognised it. He said, "Try that." Yeah, it's open. And this is a modern device on sale now. They're not thinking about it. And the thing is, it is fairly trivial in a lot of these cases to make them secure if you think about it. And the cost of not doing it is a damn sight more.
And a lot of...
Sorry, Iain, can I just add here that the very nature of security, this is an ugly truth about security. You can't win. You can only not lose. And so what I would say in response to what Chris is saying is, and when we're talking about these different cultures, where we're talking about maybe industrial control systems, maybe IT, OT, the language that we use, the good guys have got to unite. We're on the same side. Okay, yeah. But what's important is we aim for that goal, is to try to make our systems more secure. So it's not about the shop floor arguing with the IT guys. One of the things that we say quite often is that we can now start to see the problem in its naked, it's not glory at all. What we can also see is that solutions are already out there, but there's this group over here who know how to do this, but there's a group over here who've never seen it. And let me give you an example. We're majoring on one of the things that we have at the moment is something called Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure, CVD. Now, from an embedded systems perspective, I had never come across that.
Right.
If you talk to InfoSec people, if you talk to IT people, they will understand that concept. And it's very simple. What it means is this, is if you have a connected device, then you need to open up a channel that allows anybody who finds a vulnerability to be able to report it to you. And that's something that the embedded systems community has not necessarily had to understand or deal with. And that's, again, part of what we're trying to do at the foundation is to get everybody to unite. Let's not have these bickerings between ourselves. Let's share the knowledge and let's make sure we have fit-for-purpose solutions. Yeah. Yeah. So, coordinated vulnerability disclosure, if you're making connected products, make sure you have one.
Yeah.
Isn't there an IoT Security Foundation thing on doing that?
We have a guideline on it, again, because we prioritised it. What I can also tell you is that we will be producing a piece of research where we've looked at the consumer IoT market and looked at the producers of consumer IoT, and we will be able to report very soon, within the next month or so, how many of those consumer IoT companies have a vulnerability disclosure policy. It makes interesting reading.
Yes, I bet it does. Did you have a point a minute ago, Thomas?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's an overall approach. So it starts with the vendors building security into the devices or machines, but it also requires from the users setting up policies and following policies and doing all that. And I think on organizational level, certain borders or walls just need to be torn down, like between shop floor and office or internet. Technically, there's no longer a wall. It is all open, but in our minds or in our customers' minds, there's still this wall which they see as a kind of protection. And this is actually not existing, so there is no such protection. So all this needs to be changed. So I see it in a technical way. There are a lot of tools or protocols already in place. Of course, we will always be behind a little bit the hackers, but we need to keep up. And on an organizational and, I would say mindset way, we also need to open up and take it as an overall approach. It is not just one side who can do it all. It requires everyone.
I completely agree. Monoculture, as I would interpret what you're saying, is one of our challenges. If you think about everybody in your organization where they're passionate about what they do, there is a purpose for that. We may not see it because there's a silo. So going back to the question earlier, Iain, in terms of the hierarchy of where we need to line things up, at the very top it's the business level. And so what we would advocate is that on everybody's board there needs to be somebody who's dealing with risk, and risk needs to include security and safety in those aspects. So you need to make sure your business aspects, so we're talking about contract, service level agreements, regulation, compliance, those things, it has to marry up to that. Underneath that, then you have the operational aspects. How do you install, maintain, service these things, end of life, those sorts of things. And then, of course, we get down to something that I'm much more familiar with, and Chris will be too, is the kind of technical aspects of how we implement that. But the key point is this. You have to get the top layer first, because if you don't get the top layer first, the other parts become orphaned, and guess what?
You can't bolt it on afterwards.
No, that's where it becomes difficult, and that's when you have the infighting and the arguments. So we need to make sure we think about it in that order: business, operational, and then technological.
What you made a point then about the software that had a chunk of old code in it, but that is a really common thing. It's where banks are suffering at the moment, isn't it? Because they've got code and security systems that have been in place for donkey's years, and does it keep accruing, and then the weaknesses stay there?
Sadly, that's not correct.
Good.
These were new devices. This is new code in new devices.
That is quite
making
scary.
the same mistakes from the 1970s and 1980s. That's the problem. And what John was saying about monoculture, this culture only applies to people who have a device connected to another device anywhere in the world, which is everybody, including those at the South Pole. Absolutely everybody, basically. And you, as you say, you have to look at it from top to bottom. There are an awful lot of silos. There are people who say, this doesn't apply to me because I'm doing this. And there's also a lot of religious arguments. There has to be a lot of, now, bald, honest truth, what is actually happening. And security and safety apply to everybody. I was part of a group looking at security of safety critical systems. Previously, they were done for safety, but they weren't connected to anything else. Now they're connected. And sometimes you have a dichotomy between safety and security. And there's differing requirements. It has to be thought about. And you are right, there is a lot of old code out there. But unfortunately, a lot of software programmers are repeating the same mistakes year after year. Much of this, if you read Brooks, was sorted out 25 years ago. There are many other seminal works out there explaining how to do things that work that just aren't done. We have to have a massive change in how software is developed.
So in conclusion, it looks like awareness is the biggest thing, right from management, higher management, all the way down through the business. Cooperation, breaking down some of those traditional walls where those areas don't need to be and shouldn't be separated. There should be cooperation and a flow of information between those. But then right down to a common sense approach throughout a business of anything else that comes into your business, anything that contacts it, physically or remotely, something of that, so you're not opening up yourself up to fresh threats at that level.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And if you look at the nature of IoT and you look at the nature of security, they're totally at odds. Referred to it earlier. If you think about IoT, what we're trying to build is this most complex system we've ever built in human history. And what this is about is connecting lots of disparate systems and sharing data to come up with new innovations and efficiencies and services. If you think about security, what we really want to do is make the attack surface really small. So they're completely at odds with each other. Yeah. But as Chris was saying, and we've had examples in the manufacturing as well, is that actually a lot of this stuff is already known. So this is where we came from. We looked at, should we create standards? And we came to the conclusion is, actually no, standards, we have enough standards already. We need to use them better. So where we come from is best practice. Can we spread best practice? And of course, for your listeners and your viewers, we have a lot of resources on our website which are free to download and use. If I can just put that quick plug in, if you're developing products, come to the IoT Security Foundation website. We've got a lot of good guidance for you.
Well, thank you guys. It was really interesting. It's one of these conversations which will run and run as long as the Internet of Things is there. So thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.